National Institute of Justice has defined terrorists as those individuals who commit or provide support for the commission of ideologically motivated violence to further political, social, or religious goals. Terrorists are motivated by a wide variety of ideological viewpoints, have gone through different radicalization processes, and have unique grievances or life experiences that lead them towards radicalization to terrorism. According to the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, in 2017, 10,900 terrorist attacks around the world killed more than 26,400 people. The number of terrorist attacks per year in the United States in the post-9/11 era has increased from 33 in 2002 to 65 in 2017. Radicalization to terrorism can be motivated by extremist groups or ideologies, or it can occur at an individual level. The 6 most commonly known ideologies are right-wing extremism, left-wing extremism, environmental extremism, nationalist separatist extremism, religious extremism, and single-issue extremism. Risk factors for radicalization include violent extremists in an individual's social network, identity processes, violent extremist beliefs and narratives, group dynamics, connections with violent extremists, and violent extremist material through the internet and social media, and grievances. Radicalized inmates are of concern for several reasons. One of the reasons is because influential inmates could urge other prisoners to attend certain mosques or Islamic centers in the United States or overseas upon their release from prison, which may present opportunities for the proselytizing of radical Islam. Another reason is influential inmates also pose a risk to prison security by urging inmates under the influence to disobey prison authorities and possibly incite violence within the facility. And inmates who have acquired the skills used in terrorist activities can pass them on to other prisoners.
As of recent reports, the U.S. Bureau of Prisons holds approximately 380 individuals convicted of international terrorism-related crimes and 83 convicted of domestic terrorism-related offenses. In a study done by Mark S. Ham, he examines trends in prisoner radicalization in U.S. correctional institutions, focusing on the process by which prisoners adopt extreme views, including beliefs that violent measures must be taken for political or religious purposes. In his research, he found that officers in Florida and California reported uncovering potential terrorist plots drawn up by prison inmates in their systems. Research from the National Institute of Justice found that when radicalization occurs in the context of prison, the criminogenic effect of imprisonment is doubled. Specifically, the study indicated that the effects of imprisonment and prison radicalization increased post-prison violent extremism by 78 to 187%. An article from Vanity Fair discusses how prisons can act as breeding grounds for further radicalization rather than rehabilitation. It highlights the story of Brandon Russell, co-founder of the neo-Nazi organization Atomwaffen Division, whose imprisonment further radicalized him and fueled the group's growth. The article emphasizes how the far-right movement has evolved, adopting various subcultures and continuing to pose a significant threat of acts of violence aimed at destabilizing society.
Hi everyone, so I'm going to talk to you about the radicalization pipeline and the indoctrination process as a whole. So first, just a general overview of some reasons why people join these gangs. There's a feeling of isolation. People are always wanting community, but this especially increases when people are in an environment like a prison. There's also a need for group protection and a desire for resources because a lot of inmates get really fearful and they feel like they just need to survive. And then also when we get into some of the ideologically based terrorist groups, some inmates genuinely believe these ideologies that they are subscribing to. And then finally, something that I thought was interesting is that the majority of these gangs have really charismatic recruiters and leadership, almost in the same way that we talked about that cults have. Something else that's really important is that being in an online world has increased recruitment efforts, even within prisons. While a lot of inmates aren't technically supposed to have personal devices, a lot of them do have access to personal devices, and still they do have access to internet. Now getting into the radicalization pipeline specifically, it can be described in 5 phases. The first is vulnerability, which relates to the personal trauma the prisoner perhaps comes in with and the isolation they feel. The next phase is exposure, which can happen via literature or in person when another person recruits them. The third phase is engagement, which is when the inmate actually begins to adopt the group's views. This looks like socializing with members and actively attending meetings. Another important part of this phase is sometimes called a jump in, which occurs when an inmate is starting to get established in the group and multiple existing members basically jump them as a litmus test for strength. And sometimes instead of this jump in, there's a similar test in which the inmate may be asked to commit an act of violence on behalf of the group to demonstrate loyalty in addition to strength. The fourth phase is indoctrination, which involves the individual fully evolving to a point where they are even rejecting values that they once held as important that don't necessarily align with the values of the group. And then finally, the last phase is action, which may or may not even occur. But in this phase, it looks like fully vetted gang members actively planning, participating in, and or supporting extremely violent acts. Now, to kind of contextualize what this looks like, I'm going to give an example of a case study by looking at the Aryan Brotherhood, which is a white supremacist prison gang. So phase one would look like a white inmate feeling isolated and facing pressure from existing groups. In order to initially hook the person, existing gang members are going to start with small gestures, like perhaps they're going to offer food at a meal or offer a chance to sit down and have some minor conversation when the inmate's feeling isolated. Next, phase two is going to look like the inmate being shown racist literature that also just kind of promotes the worldview of the group. So, for instance, the Aryan Brotherhood often slips people copies of Mein Kampf at this stage. And then the third phase may look like an inmate being asked to jump someone on behalf of the gang. And finally, during the fourth phase, members are going to be continuing their activities, whether inside or outside the prison.
My name is Chris, and I will be interviewing Alan today. So just a couple quick questions. Can you please state your name, where you served, and how long?
My name is Alan Manuel Trujillo. I served in a juvenile detention center for 3 months and 14 days.
Okay, and what exactly did you go away for?
When I was 14, I rode on a motorcycle with my father, and because of the laws over there, it's pretty much like a sicario law. So it's suspected of murder, and it's illegal to do there.
And you mentioned you were away for 3 months and 14 days, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you notice any changes in your behavior while you were in there or afterwards?
As much as I would say, like, oh yeah, I was strong the whole time, I was by definition tough. No, I was definitely more timid, I was more quiet. If anybody would ask me to do anything, I definitely did it. For example, can you do my bed? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I definitely did it mostly out of one, fear, because I didn't want somebody to retaliate to me. Number two, I didn't want my prison sentence getting longer. Or number three, I noticed that other people took my turn to fight for me. So I was there like, I'm kind of paying it back.
So I know you mentioned that there'd be periods where, someone stepped in for you to take a fight. You would, in exchange, like make their bed or do this for them or some other favor. Were there ever the periods where you became super social with other inmates, or was it always kind of like an unspoken boundary in that sense?
It was definitely an unspoken boundary. Not saying anything wrong about tattoos, but you would see literally 16, 17-year-olds having their whole body covered with tattoos. Of course, you being that young, it's very intimidating, especially like the eye drop tattoos, or there's in our country, it's a very famous to like behind the neck. You get skull tattoos every time you murder somebody, or on the right side, if you would get it, it's like one of your like loved ones was lost. So you being in a smaller like stature and size, and you looking at these people where you literally have to look up, it's definitely intimidating. So it wasn't more like oh, I want to make a genuine friendly connection. It's I want to survive in here because I'm genuinely terrified.
Okay. And then did you see a lot of I guess like gang, not necessarily creation, more so recruitment, creation as well, but more so recruitment, especially of these, younger, more vulnerable kids?
It's very complicated because as much as I want to say yes or no, there was definitely older kids being like, oh yeah, be in this gang. There was a very famous one when I was in there. I don't know if it still exists, Caleño Kings. People, of course, yeah, they were like, yeah, I'll be on your side and everything, but I don't know how like accurate it is because curled up in a ball most of the day and just hung out either in my pod and in my cell or just in the cafeteria completely alone. It was very hard being away from family and especially being so young.
Alan's experience in this Colombian detention center is not one of a kind. Unfortunately, it's a very common occurrence for people to feel scared, timid, and out of their usual environment when they're in a prison. Being out of your element and being in such an intimidating environment creates perfect candidates for indoctrination into these radicalist groups. Like Alex said earlier in the video, there's all different kinds of indoctrination processes, and people in prison just so happen to be the perfect candidates for this kind of brainwashing. How do we prevent this kind of indoctrination and radicalization in prisons? For starters, step one would probably be trying to train our staff to see the signs of this kind of manipulation. We would want to train our staff to figure out who might be the leaders of these gangs and try to segregate them away so they can't have influence over the regular population. Another way that we could start to address these issues would be by addressing the root causes. So instead of focusing on what we can do to train staff to be more prepared, we can stop it at its core. To address the root causes, we could focus on tackling overcrowding, trying to improve conditions overall, looking at the abuse that happens inside. The less isolated that people feel, the less likely they are to feel pressured and join a gang or a group.